throughout the state. So without this partnership and support, this wouldn't be possible. We do have upcoming events. We are slowly winding down to the end of our webinar series. You can see here listed on the slide, upcoming events. We also have a special BPC Spotlight event you can see listed here October 21st. You can register for it through the SEEK website. That is this link listed directly on the top slide. You can also be able to access it. We'll send you a link in our chat box. Unfortunately, we were not able to have this event take place in person just because that's how 2020 is shaking out. So we're trying our best to create virtual spaces where people can network and connect with one another. As a result, we created what we call a SEEK peer-to-peer network. It is a LinkedIn group, so if you already have a profile, you can just type it in and join and start connecting to peers throughout the state of California. And we'll also be sending that link in the chat as well. For this webinar, we do encourage you and ask you to submit questions explicitly through this little Q&A box. You'll see the little function at the bottom. That makes it easier for us to track your questions and ensure they get answered. And also we encourage you to use the chat box, whether you want to engage with your colleagues here in the webinar or if you have any questions. If you have any tech questions, you can contact myself, Tia, and also my coworkers, Ryan and Serena. And with that, I'm going to pass it to you, Molly.
Thank you, Tia. And good morning or afternoon to everyone who has joined us from coast to coast throughout the United States. My name is Molly McKay, and I will serve as your panel moderator today. Next slide. So today we are really excited to share with you case study research we've been conducting throughout the United States related to smart cities innovations. And I join you from Willdan's Washington, D.C. office, where as an infrastructure economist, I lead Willdan's economic consulting services practice and support Willdan's Smart Cities Working Group. Joining me on the panel are my colleagues Stephen Clark and Andrea Marr from Willdan's Anaheim and Los Angeles Energy Solutions and Performance Engineering divisions. And while Steve and Andrea and I provide the consulting perspective to smart cities innovations, our panel also includes the highly valuable city practitioners' perspective with the addition of Kate Kagongo, the City of West Hollywood's innovation analyst, and who will be sharing her experience designing and implementing the WeHo Smart City Strategic Plan. Next slide. So where did we get the idea for this panel on how to phase, scale, and finance smart city solutions? Andrea, Steve, and I serve on Willdan's Smart Cities Working Group, and where we are actively engaged in serving more than 1,600 cities, counties, utilities, and other public serving entities throughout the United States. And we are asked every day to provide strategic planning solutions with a focus on funding sources and successful implementation. And as the smart cities field continues to emerge, we've been asking ourselves how we can best help our city and county clients to evolve and innovate in the context of limited public resources and expensive infrastructure needs to both achieve sustainability, energy efficiency, and quality of life objectives. Next slide. So we decided to build on our day-to-day research and by interviewing some of our past clients who are engaged in smart cities innovations. And we are here to share that research and key lessons learned with you today. So to start, what is a smart city? I'd like to turn this over to Andrea, who's going to share some of her deep thinking about the definition of smart cities.
Thanks, Molly. Good morning, everyone. So what you see on the screen is what might be considered a fairly academic view of smart cities. I think for many of us who work in the space, we don't always know that these definitions are super helpful. But traditionally, we've said that a smart city uses data and information to manage assets and to use resources more efficiently across all of the functions of the city, which you can see here, from public services to environmental management. Much of our smart city work has been rooted in energy and energy efficiency, mostly by virtue of what Willdan has done historically. But as you'll see in Kate's presentation, we think that maybe some of the approaches to defining a smart city might be worth challenging. If you'll go to the next slide, please. So as I said, traditionally, we have thought of smart systems and connectivity as sort of first and foremost on the hierarchy of things you should care about when working on a smart city. But what we're about to discuss with West Hollywood in particular indicate that maybe we should be thinking a little bit more about culture, about the value of collaboration, and about how we engage internally and externally for some of this work. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Kate to talk more about West Hollywood in particular.
Good morning or afternoon, everyone. I'm Kate Kigongo with the City of West Hollywood. I think a lot of the participants on this call know West Hollywood. We're a 1.9 square mile city in the center of LA County. And we like to think of ourselves as a smart city urban laboratory. My division is the innovation team, and we're housed in the city manager's office. In 2016, we began talking about a new topic, smart cities. It was emerging in city discussions, and our city manager, from a leadership standpoint, really wanted my team to explore smart cities. So we found ourselves in early 2017 putting together this idea for a smart city strategic plan. We released an RFP in January 2017 for a strategic plan consultant to help build the city's strategic plan. A number of connected projects were occurring without any unifying plan to guarantee some of the cross-departmental benefits and synergies that smart cities promised. Those projects included the purchase of our streetlights from Southern California Edison, the renovation of all of our bus shelters, and the development of a municipal fiber network. At this time in 2017, there were very few other cities that we could follow. I think Chula Vista in California was an early smart city plan, and there were very few across the country. The city of West Hollywood is known for being cutting edge in policy and planning, so we set out to create this plan of our own. And why not just get started on projects? Why a plan? Well, my team is led to urban planners and we love plans, but really it holds us accountable to the priorities set by the leadership, by the staff, and by our community. So when we, got to the point where we were designing an outreach plan, the saying, all great plans start with outreach. Well, that's not exactly true. But we knew that this topic for Smart City was new. What is a smart city? What's a dumb city? We didn't really have a strategy for this. There wasn't a blueprint for us to follow. So we knew that we needed to go a little bit outside the box and go beyond business as usual. I really believe in the power of a good brand, especially when it comes to introducing new ideas to the community. At the same time we released the RFP, we began a branding process with one of the city's bench consultants to define how we talk about technology and infrastructure with our community. The Department of Public Works, our IT team, doesn't normally go out to talk to the community about their work. That's just a public service that's not often communicated about. So we'd never done it before. We also needed to know how to build support internally so that management and staff didn't just think that this was extra work or another buzzword to check off, on the city's, accomplishments list. Over the course of 3 months, we conducted 30 small group and one-on-one interviews with staff and community members to ask them how technology plays into their daily lives and how they think it can help them achieve their goals and improve their quality of life. What we found is that most people really think of themselves as not very tech savvy, but a senior citizen might say, well, I'm not a techie, but I have a Nest thermostat and I FaceTime my grandchildren. So they're comfortable with technology and comfortable with Internet of Things and new ideas, but they don't think about technology as playing a major role in their life. What we learned and what we got from this branding process was, more than just logos and fonts and color schemes, but we actually got a tool to talk about the benefits of technology. That's what our community cared about, not the tech features that maybe us technical or city wonks are excited about. It gave us a way to talk to staff, to the community, to our partners, and a way to really communicate the benefit of all of this work to become a smart city. So with this tool in hand, we began our process of what we call Inreach, a term we've concocted to talk to staff, to talk about how to get staff on board with this plan. This is outreach for your own team. We heavily prioritize staff's input in the development of the plan, asking them how technology can give them tools to be better service providers. We started with the managers and directors who were asked to journey map the citizen experience, putting them in the shoes of their customers. We've never really thought about the constituents of our city as customers before, so that was new as well. By bringing our managers and directors together in a casual roundtable format, and by thinking about the customer first, we asked them, how can technology help you do your work better, manage your teams better, and serve your customers better? This Inreach was critical to getting the buy-in we needed to make the Smart City Plan a success. The next phase of Inreach involved workshops for all staff. So we held these in the City Hall courtyard at lunchtime, asking staff to prioritize what potential projects they thought were the most important to their work. So based on the managers and directors' feedback, we'd come up with a list of potential projects. We needed to ask staff, how would you prioritize these? What helps you get your work done better? How can you be more effective at helping our community? This step took extra time, effort, and I'll be honest, some tears. It poured rain all morning up until about 30 minutes before this day you see pictured here. But when those 60 plus staff members that attended participated in the development of a citywide strategic plan, that Inreach was really worth it. There was some ownership there on their part. So finally, when the plan was nearly ready, we moved to our traditional outreach process. We talked to the community about privacy, technology, urban design in an engaging Smart City Fest format. We invited industry experts from the City of Seattle, KCRW's Francis Anderton, to hear our plans, ask us questions, and engage in a conversation with our community about what they wanted a smart city to be. Here you also see what we prioritized as SMART: sustainability, mobility, accessibility, resiliency, and transparency. That's not just a civic word soup. That's actually how we identified projects in our plans. If a smart city project came our way that didn't meet one of those city priorities, it wasn't something that we considered. And that's still a framework now for how I view new projects and potential changes to our work plan. If they don't meet any of those goals, they don't really help us become smart after all. And conveniently, you'll notice that they spell smart. So we find ourselves now presenting to Council in 2018 with a WeHo Smart City strategic plan. The plan included 3 strategies, 14 initiatives, and 41 actions, asking us to think broadly about technology and its impacts on our work. The strategies ask us to ponder, what do we need to do now to prepare for the city of the future? And how can we test our ideas and solutions for what we think that future might be? For the purposes of today's discussion, I'll focus mostly on the technology pieces of the project. But much of my work is focused on workflow improvements, data training and data management, and giving staff the tools they need to be 21st century public servants. Many of those projects are included in Strategy 1. So we've got a plan, we have our work plan. How do we finance and implement it? This was not intended to be a plan that sits on a shelf. It's intended to be actionable and something that gets us started on the journey of becoming a smart city. So we really had to think about, okay, as soon as we get this plan going, we immediately need to come up with our implementation plan. The funding for this process has been incremental and varied. The plan consultant contract came from the operating budget and was $150,000. The pilot projects that we do are set up as honorariums in our operating budget and average $10,000 to $50,000 per pilot project. And major capital improvement program projects can be as much as $5 or $10 million. Some of our public-private partnership projects are even revenue generating. So I'm going to spend the next few slides going through some of the projects I've worked on and how we've financed and implemented those. So here you see a photo of the ENA Hub Smart Node pilot, which included 2 pilot streetlight poles, including electric vehicle chargers, space for small cell co-location, public Wi-Fi, LED lighting, environmental sensors, pedestrian and vehicle counters, and the ability to add CCTV for public safety. This project was part of our operating budget and done on an honorarium, and was just as valuable for our private sector partner to learn about how to implement this technology in urban settings. This was a year-long pilot project that's coming to a close this fall. The public safety camera and sensors pilot project was also done on an honorarium, but this project had a bigger budget and compared the work of 3 different vendors over 5 intersections. Here you see camera footage from one of those vendors, Verizon Wireless, one of our project partners, and a major player in the smart city technology space. Not only did we get public safety information, which was a council priority using the cameras, we explored using sensors to get valuable insights into traffic flow and indicators, informing our traffic management systems, our pet and bike counts, and we even used some of the data on our local Ciclavia weekend to measure traffic before and after the event and during. The Municipal Fiber Master Plan that you see here that our map for is being implemented in 3 phases using capital improvement program dollars. This is a multi-million-dollar project and the backbone of our smart city infrastructure. The project will be complete over a span of almost a decade of building so that the city can someday explore offering fiber to businesses or potentially even someday fiber all the way to the home for our residents. My last example here is the Smart City Bus Shelter and Stops program. So this is a revenue generating public-private partnership with Outfront Media and JCDecaux. By converting our static advertising to digital advertising, we've been able to afford adding real-time arrival screens, Wi-Fi, phone chargers, enhanced lighting and seating to the bus stops. Prioritizing projects that benefit transit riders helps us achieve those sustainability and climate action goals across the city. So now that I've showed you some of my projects, I'd like to share some of my lessons that I've learned so far. So these are 2 of my favorite pictures that I like to use when talking about smart cities. They look like the classic pointing and staring photos. You know, you've got engineers, you've got project owners, project partners, electricians. And what are we looking at? We're looking at our service cabinets, our breakers. We're looking at our conduit. We're looking at our ability to pull new fiber. And what you maybe don't see here is that they're all completely maxed out and in need of upgrades. So this project is our Smart City Bus Shelter project. And this team is looking at the ability to move beyond the prototype that you saw 2 slides ago and into a full-scale implementation of all of our bus shelters across the city. My number 1 lesson learned in building smart city projects and pilot projects and thinking about how to scale these is that fiber connectivity, conduit capacity, and the capacity of your electric system to handle new technologies is the backbone of building and planning for your smart city. While you might be able to make a solution work for a pilot project or a prototype, scaling this is nearly impossible without the proper capacity in your fiber system, your conduit system, and your electric system. Statewide regulation forces us to be
really conservative in our conduit, and in City of West Hollywood, we've actually had to back up on a number of our projects and slow down our work, slow down our plans for scaling, and really think about how are we going to build this backbone so that we can power and connect the infrastructure that we think is the future of our city. So I didn't create this graphic. I've used it in so many presentations. I don't even remember where I got it, but I think it's one of the best smart city graphics out there for a lot of reasons. You might look at this photo and think, wow, Kate's right. I am going to need a lot of power and fiber and conduit to make this all possible. But what I see here is a big privacy warning sign. My second lesson is that privacy is the biggest potential roadblock to successful projects. All of these new collected technologies collect data. That pedestrian traffic sensor might have video that can capture faces. You'll want to make sure you have a policy for facial recognition. That smart trash can might ping your cell phone data. You'll want to make sure you know where that data is being stored and what's being done with it. And that public Wi-Fi kiosk is definitely has access to the websites visited while connected to it. So you want to make sure you have a policy alerting people who connect to it that their activity might be monitored. As a matter of transparency and accountability, all of the smart infrastructure projects need to have privacy built into the core of the project. The West Hollywood way is that we have a set of smart city privacy guidelines and a smart city project privacy statement that's intended to be applied during the procurement process. Language regarding the guidelines is now a part of all smart city solicitations and included in the agreement for service and contracts. Responses to this privacy statement ask vendors to explain their technology in plain language, what data they collect, how it's stored on their end, and how it's accessed. Responses to this statement are factored into the evaluation metrics for each smart city project. You'll see it's often combined with cybersecurity measures to be up to 25% of available points on an evaluation of a new technology. That's a lot. That really matters to us. And the responses to these, now that I've seen, a few dozen come in, really let you know how serious a company is when they talk about privacy and the measures they take to protect your citizens. My third lesson is that the plan has to be nimble. As time goes on, technology is going to change faster than government can keep up, and that's okay. Smart cities, almost by definition, need to be iterative. They are not a point-in-time document that can be worked off of for 20 years. This isn't a general plan or a long-term strategic vision plan. You as a smart city implementation team need to be prepared to go back to council and update your plans on a regular basis. You need to plan to have the capacity yourself or have your consultant team on board to go back whenever technology changes or whenever the sort of tide of smart city technology moves forward. My team goes back to council every 2 years with plan progress and updates. And we plan to continue to iterate and change and modify the strategic plan as technology changes. Lastly, I really believe that a smart city is one that seeks to tear down barriers to collaboration and remove silos inside City Hall so that you can deliver the best possible services to your constituents. Here you see the way we phased our program over 5 years. I work on developing West Hollywood as a smart city from all different angles. You see here, we're trying to get to a smart city hall, we want to have a smart streetscape, and we want to have smart mobility. That means that while I may focus on upskilling staff and building capacity for data analytics one day, the next I might be collaborating on a project to transform our streetlights into smart city hubs. And the week after that, I might work on a program to study mobility data and how we might use that data to better inform our traffic management system. Smart cities are all about using technology to improve quality of life for the peoples that live, work, and play in your city. And so thinking about every one of those experiences keeps me on my toes and ready to always deliver new projects and ideas. So I thank you for your time. I'll be available to answer questions at the end. And now Steve is going to talk about a case study on a much smaller scale, but with highly tangible benefits.
Great. Thanks, Kate. And good morning to everyone. I want to take everyone through a project which Willdan is assisting the city of El Cajon. Full disclosure, this project is still very much an in-progress effort, but I'll do my best to lay out our current thinking for everyone. As part of El Cajon's smart city planning efforts, they are looking for projects that would provide power for various city facilities and their broader community in an economic and sustainable way, like during an emergency, like a wildfire or earthquake, or during a PSPS type planned utility outage, or just for community power, like a farmer's market, carnival, outdoor event, so on and so forth. With some of these goals in mind, the city went out for a standard solar and stationary battery storage procurement at 3 of their fire stations and public safety center, as others had done before. But due to the relatively small project size and resiliency storage focus, vendors weren't able to offer a cost-effective solution acceptable to the city. So they went back to the drawing board with Willdan's help and rekindled talks with Danner, a company who had approached them a couple years ago about this mobile battery storage solution. I'll show you a picture on the next slide, but if you're not familiar with these vehicles, think of a bunch of batteries on wheels. They can also serve as a service vehicle with various attachments, buckets, graders, lifts, etc. This new project envisioned that the Danner vehicles would be interconnected to the public safety center, charged by solar PV. They would generate revenue by providing peak shaving. They'd help project payback by being eligible for significant incentives and provide that important dispatchable power to the community. Next slide. So here's an overview of the updated project that Willdan helped them envision. First off, it added roughly an additional 0.5 megawatt of solar PV to the public safety center. It had solar PV already, but not nearly enough to provide a sizable dent in the high base load at the 24/7 facility. As I mentioned, on the right there, you can see an example of the 2 500 kilowatt hour Danner MPS mobile power stations that would be interconnected in the parking garage of the building to store the energy generated by solar PV, play rate arbitrage to generate revenue for the city, and also be dispatchable to the community if needed. And then finally, the system will use microgrid controller to manage all the distributed energy resources, charging and discharging of the batteries, and coordination with building operation and grid needs. Next slide. This slide shows how Willdan helped the city of El Cajon optimize battery operation for their intended goals. While at first resiliency was a key focus for the Danner units, they're still capable of that functionality in the future. The building already has a diesel generator, which provides the necessary resiliency functionality. And so we focused the battery operation for this project on peak shaving instead to generate maximum revenue for the facility. If you can see this, I know it's a bit of an eye chart, but if you can see this here, this modeling shows the interaction between the solar PV, the Danner units and their onboard batteries, and then the financial benefits that couldn't be achieved by such a strategy here. Next slide. So let's review some of the project benefits which will help El Cajon advance their smart city vision with this project. First, on the sustainability front, this system will increase their sustainability by locally generating more electricity for their public safety building with over 0.5 megawatt of additional solar PV, energy that is consumed on-site or stored in the Danner batteries. Next, and a key driver moving forward with this project, the Danner units allow the city to leverage significant incentives from CARB and additional bill savings from their peak shaving operational strategy. This was enough to take a project payback originally from over 20 years using a traditional solution down to 15 years. And additionally, with energy efficiency opportunities that Willdan identified while on site, the entire project payback is looking more around 12 years right now. That's a big jump down from 20 to 12 years. This project is also an opportunity to upgrade aging infrastructure at the city, especially with their existing solar PV, which as we come to understand, doesn't operate reliably. We're envisioning using the existing racking for solar PV already in place with new infrastructure to refresh and enlarge the solar PV using the latest technology, including smart inverters necessary to enable additional project functionality in the future. This project will give El Cajon a megawatt hour of dispatchable storage for the community. These vehicles can be rapidly deployed, driven directly to the location they're needed to be, and act just like mobile generators. They're even equipped with their own onboard inverters, which output 3-phase 480-volt power for direct building interconnection. And finally, this project will drive forward products and standards development. Danner's discussions with El Cajon are driving forward product technology development, and our discussions with SDG&E are causing everyone to think about new project ideas and how those interconnect with the grid and can scale in the future. Finally, lessons learned. Some lessons learned so far, as probably many, many more are to come as we advance down the road of this project. We've heard it all before, but stakeholder engagement and alignment is crucial to moving a project forward. By consulting key stakeholders, El Cajon identified a number of related needs and found this Danner solution that satisfied a number of them. Willdan's been engaged with El Cajon for over a year now, and we've worked with them through project conceptualization and iteration. We expect this project to evolve even further as we dig deeper with SDG&E and we explore procurement strategies which help bidding vendors offer creative and cost-competitive solutions. We also have learned to look at projects differently. When a standard solar PV and battery storage procurement didn't yield the intended economic results, we looked back at other options and newly available information, like those core off-road incentives, to rethink the project concept. And finally, on the front of everyone's mind is how we can get this project to scale across the city for enhanced financial return, for resiliency, and for community power. The information we learn from this initial project will inform future efforts to help El Cajon move toward their overall smart city vision. Now, Andrea is going to talk a little bit more about further lessons learned.
Thanks, Steve. So we've seen really the smart city umbrella is pretty big. And so we're seeing projects that are very technology focused and solving a very small problem. And then we're also seeing projects that are quite broad, that are strategic in nature. And I think, you know, I'm happy to have this discussion if anybody wants to chime in the Q&A, but I think it's important to recognize like those are all smart cities projects. And there are some commonalities. Molly will talk a little bit in next slide, I think, about the case studies that we've done really across the board, but there are commonalities, even if we're talking about the widget project, or even if we're talking about the large strategic project. And those are really that number one, that there's alignment at the top, or at least an attempt to get to alignment. And so we've seen a number of RFIs and RFPs out recently too, that are talking about how do we sort of come to a consensus about what our ultimate mission is. And I thought it was really interesting that West Hollywood started with a branding and outreach effort, because that, you know, that's another way to make sure we're all on the same page about what we're talking about when we talk about smart cities. The other thing is this idea of institutional alignment. And so just like we want the public to understand what we're talking about when we say smart cities, do our individual departments feel the same way? And so this idea of doing Inreach, as somebody who wears a second hat in addition to my role at Willdan as a city council member, I think this idea of finding alignment within City Hall is just as important as the education we do externally to the public. Across all of the different departments, this isn't something that should just necessarily live in IT and IT infrastructure, because really for every role at City Hall, there's an opportunity to be communicating and collecting more data and making data-driven decisions based on that data. And so we need to be careful not to sort of silo it into one city department specifically. And then also this idea of pilot projects and iteration, that not every project is going to be perfect, that there's room to experiment. Let's try things out. If it doesn't work, we try something else out. And recognizing that the entire project team has that opportunity to fail, to try again, to iterate, and that just because we have a smart city strategic plan, we are not being held to it regardless of any of the outcomes of our projects. And then last but not least, we did talk about funding. And so I just want to kind of go back to some of the things that Kate said in terms of they have some projects that are honorarium based. They have some projects that are just straight revenue generating, which is fantastic. some projects that are coming out of CIP dollars or general fund dollars. And so, you know, there's no one size fits all. We spend a lot of time, actually, Steve and I sort of combing around for grants and on-bill financing and ways that we can make projects work, because so many of them are non-traditional. And so really just kind of keeping the broadest possible outlook on ways to fund these projects is really important. It's not necessarily just all going to come out of general fund money. And so we've got our case study research available. Molly has spent a lot of time in particular interviewing different cities and making sure that we kind of understand the trends that are out there. And I think with that, I'll turn it back over to her.
Thank you, Andrea. So we really appreciate everybody joining us today to share in this research. And especially, we'd like to thank Kate for providing her in-depth case study of the City of West Hollywood's WeHo Smart City Strategic Plan. We've learned a lot working together to produce this panel. And we'd also like to share with you the summary case study research. As Andrea indicated, it will be available in the appendix to this PowerPoint provided on the California SEEK website. There will be a link. And we'd also like to invite anyone who's participating in joining us and to provide us with input on our case study research. So we're inviting you to participate in an interview, and we're happy to share our research as we move along over the next 6 months or so, producing a white paper on this research. And just very quickly, I wanted to talk about some of the metrics that we have included in this research. So we were looking at the program vision and the mission statement just to help understand what the perspectives of different cities were in terms of the smart cities objectives. And city department leads the organizational and institutional structure and the technology or infrastructure improvements that would be achieved, the barriers or obstacles to implementation, and finally the funding sources. And I would say one of the biggest takeaways for us is that a lot of these projects initially, in terms of the planning, are being funded with general fund money, and incrementally, as infrastructure improvements are made, and it can be funded with traditional CIP and general fund resources. And beyond that, there are some very compelling opportunities for partnerships with vendors and other technology providers, such as the Verizon example. So there are a lot of creative ways to incrementally fund your smart cities solutions. And so please check out the link and please contact me if you'd like to participate in our research project. And with that, I'm going to open it up to Q&A. So please use the Q&A function on your Zoom. In the bottom center, there's a bar that says Q&A, and you can type in your question, and I'm going to direct the questions to the different panelists as we move along, starting with the first question that was asked. So just give me a moment. The first question that came up was, what is the pizza tracker? And that's the question for Kate.
Yeah, so a pizza tracker is very much a product of a 2017 idea. Now we're also used to tracking our food on our phone as it is being made and delivered to us. But at the time, I think it was only Domino's was really doing that. So we thought, you know, if you can order a pizza online and you can see when it's being cooked and you can see the name of the person cooking and send them a little note of encouragement. And then you can see when it's being packaged and put in the car, and you can give instructions for how it should be delivered to you, and you can get an alert when it's there. If you can do that with your pizza, you should be able to do that with your city services. And if you make a request to the city, you should also be able to do that. You should be able to get alerts along the way. It shouldn't just be that you fill out a form on the website and in an unknown period of time, you will get the thing that you requested. So we really started thinking about how can we turn all of the services inside City Hall into digital services that have responsive feedback back to our community, so that people know how long the request will take, whether it's something as simple as trash pickup, as complex as a public records request act, a public records search. And then we also thought about internally, some of our internal systems, like the length of time it takes to get a contract approved through finance and through risk, giving our staff more of an idea when they're going to be able to launch their own projects. So, we call it a pizza tracker. Now it's probably just, it's a delivery tracker. The thing you request, you should be able to know when you're going to get it.
Thank you for that. Okay, moving on to the next question. This is for Steve. What if roads are closed? How does the mobile battery arrive?
Good question. So you can think of the mobile battery a lot like a backhoe. It doesn't need open roads. It is technically an off-road vehicle. And that's actually why it was eligible for the significant incentives it was. Whereas on-road vehicle incentives throughout the state have dried up or have been fully subscribed, Danner was on point with the opening of what we call the core incentives, California off-road equipment incentives for forklifts and port equipment. They got their vehicle early on to qualify for that, and were one of the first in the queue to receive those incentives. So this is an off-road vehicle, and the city, in the event they need to get it somewhere, pulls it out of the garage, drives it to where it needs to go. If the road's blocked by cars, it can move those out of the way too. I don't foresee it having a challenge. There are pictures on the website of it fording rivers. It is pretty much a go anywhere vehicle.
Thank you, Steve. Next question is also for you. So how long do the Danner units last? For example, if the power is out for several days, will it continue to work?
Yeah, another good question. So on board, each Danner unit is 500-ish kilowatt hours of batteries, and it is able to offload that power at up to 100 kW. So it can power a smaller, and at 483 phase. So it can power a smaller building. It can, so really depending on how quickly you can take the power out, minimum is 5 hours essentially. But if you take some power out, you can technically drive it back to the public safety building, plug it in, recharge it, and then send it off and deploy it again. So it is meant to be kind of a refillable, resilient solution.
Great. Okay, so the next question is for each of the panelists. So I'd like you to raise your hand if you're ready to answer. Could each of the panelists describe how smart cities actions connect to the goals of the city's climate action plan to mitigate and adapt to climate change? That is a great question. So who would like to answer first?
I can start. So I think often when we talk climate change, especially as it relates to individual cities, it's such an abstract concept, right? What are we actually measuring? And for the most part, I hate measuring things just for the sake of measuring them. We should be measuring them so we can make a decision using that information. But I think some of the dashboards I've seen from cities where they're actually tracking number of renewable energy installations in homes, energy usage at City Hall, sort of first and second and third order greenhouse gas emissions based on number of vehicles that are traveling in and out of their city, how folks are getting to City Hall in the first place, and how many electric vehicles they have, how many electric buses the city is operating. That information, if you're able to make your climate action plan feel real and feel like we have that detailed information that we can actually pinpoint and say that's where we should be investing more, because look at the impact it's having on our overall goals, I think is really important in how we communicate with the public, especially. Removing these concepts from being sort of abstract aspirations to really being trackable, something they can click on and say we are making progress, I think has this follow-on effect that's really important. And so I don't know if anybody in the audience has like good examples of cities they've seen doing this level of dashboarding and data collecting. I know some are kind of working towards that. City of Encinitas pops out in my head as one that's done the climate action planning and is starting to figure out what to track to get there. I'd love to see them, because I think that's probably the best answer that I can give about why this is important.
Great. So Kate, would you like to? Yes, great.
Sure. So I agree with everything Andrea just said. You know, one of the benefits of smart cities is that, at least the way that West Hollywood is working on it, is that you're taking our infrastructure, we're connecting it to the grid so that we have the ability to process data in real time. We understand how many pedestrians are crossing the street, where are bicycles getting choked up on our street, how long are people waiting for the bus. You know, when you think about mobility and its ability to impact the climate action plan, and you think about using mobility initiatives to reduce vehicle emissions, the smart city technologies, particularly the sensors, give us such an opportunity to learn in real time rather than just points of time counts from consultants, or 2 or 3 times a year doing our traffic studies. I also think that having that real-time data allows us to respond in real time when we have severe climate events. I think the air quality issues that we've experienced here in California are a great example of the power of having connected real-time data. By using the, I personally use the Purple Air map. That's an Internet of Things smart city device, that Purple Air sensor. And to be able to have an updated map every 10 minutes to understand the hyperlocal air quality allows cities and recreation programs and outdoor, cities in Southern California where we're outside all year long, camps, things like that, gives them the opportunity to make policy about what happens when we experience extreme climate events. And that's a policy benefit that I think helps the environmental health of all smart city residents.
Thank you. So Steve, would you like to add some thoughts?
Sure. Just a quick thought here. City of El Cajon has identified a climate action plan that has greenhouse gas reduction as primary or a key goal in line with the state goals. So with this project, specifically the increases in solar, a shift or nod toward a vehicle electrification, and ultimately charting a pathway toward using batteries for resiliency instead of diesel generators, all contribute to that greenhouse gas reduction. They're in the midst of their kind of smart cities planning effort right now. So this may be a little bit cart before the horse, but certainly is in line with what they've envisioned, and will help probably inform some more of their discussions on a citywide basis.
Great. Okay, one more question for you at this point, Steve. So how do scanner units power a building? What exactly do they plug?
I mean, it seems like such a simple question, but it's one that we actually had to rethink a number of times during this project. That the initial project concept or the initial Danner vehicle that we got, they said, hey, yeah, it's got a J1772 regular EV charging port. how is that going to and then we thought, well, how's that going to interconnect with the building? And then we, iterated on that a little bit and said, well, okay, if we're putting out, we're looking at the inverters on the batteries on board, then we need a transformer. Then how are we going to couple it, by standard cam locks? What we've actually now gotten toward is Danner is putting everything on board the vehicle, the batteries, the inverter, and the transformer. So it has essentially 5 cam lock ports like a regular diesel generator or mobile diesel generator does. And you can, anything that has those 5 cam lock ports, it can interface with and plug directly into.
So another question for Steve. Did you also consider fuel cells for backup generation?
Not at this time. Certainly that is another technology that the city might consider. Although given their preferences to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we've seen it start to be a little bit sticky of a project.
Okay, and one more question for you. How much did the vehicle cost? And in terms of the actual cost to the city?
Yeah, I don't have that on me right now. I think it's wildly variable depending on how you spec it. When you go into a dealer, say, how much does this car cost? And they say, how many options do you want? That's kind of like the Danner. The base battery is like 120 something kilowatt hours, and that can go all the way up to 500. So that wildly affects the price. I do know that don't quote me on this. I want to say it was like 400,000 in the configuration that El Cajon had. And I believe about half of that came back via the core incentives.
Great. So now that we don't have any open questions, I think I would like to just further elaborate some of the research that we uncovered regarding the cost of smart city solutions and the phasing, because I think, again, that was really one of the most surprising aspects of what we learned. And what we found is that for the strategic planning, it could be anywhere from $20,000 to $150,000. Very, very wide range. In fact, Kate shared with us when the City of West Hollywood put out their RFP to bid, they received something like 24 or 26 proposals, which was very unusual. And the proposal, the fee proposals ranged from 20 or 40,000 to 400,000. So this is the very wide variety of perspectives on the scale and the level of effort that would be required on really the pre-planning stage. And then moving on to those initial infrastructure investments. Again, I think that the City of West Hollywood is such a great example because through the pilot projects, and I think Kate can elaborate more on this, the initial costs were less than $3 million, and then they identified where they had gaps in their infrastructure that would require more funding, and they also uncovered some opportunities for partnerships with tech vendors that potentially could produce data that could be very valuable and shared. So Kate, I'd like for you to just elaborate a little bit more on those parameters.
Sure. So the pilot project, the WeHo Smart City Strategic Plan, is really set up to be a series of pilot projects that occur alongside a number of more traditional capital improvement program projects. So that fiber master plan, the renovation of all of the bus shelters, those are long-term plans that are in progress. Purchasing the streetlights from Southern California Edison, that was a major purchase for the city. And the conversion to LED lighting will, of course, help us pay back that, the cost of that project over 20 years. So we had various ways to to finance some of the larger infrastructure projects, but we didn't have a clear sense of why we would invest in a new smart city technology on a large scale without testing it first. So the pilot projects are set up as a way to test new technologies, make sure that if something is connected and giving us data, that we can use it, store it, understand it, that we understand the public records implications of having that kind of data, and that we're actually finding the smart city benefit useful. So the pilot projects have been set up as a series of comparisons between different vendors. So the goal on every pilot project is really to look at different vendors and their approach to using technology. So on the public safety camera program, we offered a $10,000 honorarium per intersection for each of the vendors. We had 3 vendors with 5 intersections total, so $50,000 for that. Now you might wonder, as from a vendor side, well, what's in it for them? $20,000, say if they have 2 intersections, barely covers the cost of the hardware, the data storage over an 18-month or 12-month period. But so much of this technology is new, and these private sector companies are very eager to get proof of concept projects out installed in public rights of way. They're really trying to prove their technology. And we're also willing partners in helping them in the sort of discovery of how these projects are actually implemented inside City Hall. So working with a company like Verizon, for instance, Verizon had 1 intersection in the city. So we gave them, we worked with them for $10,000, and we got an incredible learning opportunity, I think, for both teams to spend a little bit of money on a small amount of hardware to test something quickly, rapidly, and understand, what do we need? Does this work? If we were to scale it, how much would it cost? What are the lessons learned that we need for scaling a bigger project? That was a great example of lessons learned, because we had used those cameras and sensors at the intersections. And what we found was that although intersections are great for traffic information and traffic flow and measuring sort of vehicle miles traveled from one point to the other throughout the city, it makes for a really terrible public safety camera. So, we're doing a new project where we're going to try using that same data and collecting that same information on the streetlights mid-block. And so if we can achieve the public safety goals of the city council and achieve the sort of data collection goals for our engineering team, in the second pilot project, the second go around, then we know that we've got a successful project that we can bid out for a full scale implementation. So, your pilot project, you might need to redo it at some point, and that might cost some more money. But going and asking for $50,000 in your budget to test some new technology is a lot better than saying, I need $3 million to install public safety cameras at 15 locations throughout the city for a 10-year contract, if you don't even know that the technology works and that the data is going to be useful. So I see the benefit of pilot projects as not only being a way to test your technology, but it's also a really good way to convince somebody to give you money, whether that's your council or your city manager or your mayor. All I need is $25,000, $30,000. I can get a smart city project, a pilot project off the ground. I don't need to ask for $3, $5, $10 million, especially not right now when all of our budgets are so impacted because of the pandemic.
Absolutely. I think that is a great landing spot for us with this panel. I think one of the biggest takeaways that I'd like to share is that it is said that the best time to plant a tree is yesterday. And it is really important with emerging technology like this to take action, even if incrementally, and trial and error can sometimes be the most productive way to really move the ball forward. So, oh, I guess we have one more question. I'm sorry. It says, could someone say a little something about what was done in Irvine smart city-wise? I'm not sure if we have an answer to that at the time. Unfortunately, one of our panelists was unable to join us from the City of Irvine. So we will have to table that question. But again, we are here to collaborate with you and as we move forward with this research project. So please get in touch with us if you'd like to be interviewed, and we will share our research. And we're so glad you're able to join us today. And with that, I'm going to close the panel. So everyone, stay safe and have a good day. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending. We just want to quickly ask people who attended to fill out a SEEK survey. We'll be sending it in the chat, and that survey provides really helpful information for us in terms of rating the content, so we can make sure we're providing resources to local governments. But thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Evening.